Hey guys, my name's Dale and this is Think Fact. Due to high demand, I'll be continuing the miniseries 10 Interesting Facts That Almost Nobody Knows, where I try to find interesting information that almost nobody's heard of. I plan on making new episodes every 1 or 2 months in order to keep the quality of the interesting information up because it's kind of hard to find really good facts. So with all that said, let's learn something. Taste is very interesting. Beyond what smell can provide to us in terms of how things taste, scientists have found out a new factor that actually influences the way things taste to us. Sound. Researchers at Oxford University have found that by having different frequencies play while subjects are eating the same food, different things can be tasted. While having low frequencies play, subjects tend to taste bitterness more. While having higher frequencies play, subjects tend to taste sweetness more. Other studies have also shown that altitude and the sounds that planes emit can make food taste less enjoyable. This has the potential to make sweetness and saltiness in foods much less noticeable. Foods that are high in umami, which is savoriness, such as tomatoes and meats, tend to have different levels of intensity depending on the frequency playing around them. If you'd like to try any of this out for yourself, check out the link in the description and follow the instructions and the links, and you might see if this works for you. Let me know. Now, the story of Aladdin and the Magical Lamp is very well known, especially with the Disney adaptation of the story. The story is a part of 1001 Arabian Nights, which is a collection of different stories throughout the Islamic world that were put together during the Islamic Golden Age. Interestingly enough, though, the story of Aladdin is not a part of the original collection, but instead added much later by a French translator. That's right, the story of Aladdin was constructed by a Frenchman. Though the story is rumored to be Syrian in origin, the actual story itself is very different than the one that most people think it's about, like the one that Disney portrayed. That's because Aladdin is ethnically Chinese and the story actually takes place in China. The story does have Islamic terminology such as sultan and does specify that the characters are Muslims themselves. It does not take place in the Arabian Peninsula or anywhere in Arabia, but entirely in China. Princess Jasmine's original name is Babarul Babar, which actually is Arabian, but her title is known as the Princess of the Far East. Though this is very different than the Aladdin we know today, most people speculate that the story actually takes place in the Xizang province in China. Now, it can be quite hard to get a good perspective of how far away the moon is from Earth. That said, did you know that you can actually fit all the planets in the solar system if put side by side in between the moon and the Earth? Now, the average distance the moon is away from the Earth is about 384,000 kilometers. Though if you were to put every single planet side by side, it would be just about 380,000 kilometers. Just barely there. Now that is the average because the moon at its closest point has the ability to be about 360,000 kilometers away from the Earth. But at its furthest point, it can be about 400,000 kilometers away from the Earth. So a majority of the time, you can fit every single planet between the moon and the Earth. So that may change your perspective on how big the planets are or how far away the moon is from the Earth. Back in the 1580s, Christian monks in Kyoto, Japan were setting up operations under the permission of Oba Nobunaga, who had great admiration for Western culture. Due to the influx of Christians coming and going, one group of monks actually brought an African servant from Mozambique with them to Kyoto, Japan. The only name he is known as is the one that the Japanese recorded in their own records, which is Yusuke. Not only was he black, but he was also 6'2", which made him much taller than the local Japanese at the time. He was thought to be in his mid-20s, and he was known to be extremely strong. Being that he knew some Japanese, Nobunaga actually asked to be introduced to him, and after becoming good friends, Nobunaga actually asked the monks if he could have Yusuke join him. They willingly agreed, and Nobunaga actually promoted Yusuke to the rank of samurai. So he is the first and only samurai of African descent, which makes him like really cool. Nobunaga actually had Yusuke fight alongside him in battle, even in his last battle to the death, where Yusuke was eventually captured and released due to him not being Japanese and they didn't want to kill him. They gave him back to the monks, and after they were extremely relieved to have him back because they were worried about him, he kind of disappears from history from there. About 10 years after that, Tokugawa would eventually take charge of what was left of this massive empire that was created and would make Christianity illegal, kicking out almost all the monks, and it was assumed that Yusuke left along with them. But I'll tell you what, that would make an awesome movie, so someone's gotta get on that. Welding is one of the most amazing scientific capabilities that we have, especially in the era of electronics and heavy machinery. Though we've been capable of doing it for about 5,000 years with major breakthroughs along the way, scientists and most people only ever thought you could weld metal. That was until recently when engineers and scientists came together and found out that you can actually weld wood. Yes, wood. Turns out that they discovered that you can actually weld wood through a process known as linear friction welding. This is by putting two objects side by side and having one of them vibrate intensely through frequencies in order to fuse them together by welding. And to get wood to work, they found out that you can actually fuse it together with a frequency of about 200 Hertz. Though there's still a lot to learn, scientists and engineers are extremely excited to see this technology one day become widely available. Now, cooking with eggs can be an extremely important part of getting certain foods at the right consistency or even to cook well, most notably in baking. Though recently, a team at Nordic Food Labs actually found a different substance that can be worked perfectly as a substitute for eggs. Blood. That's right, foods that call for eggs can just about be perfectly substituted with blood, and this is because of their protein composition being extremely similar. Some foods that they have made are blood pancakes, blood ice cream, and even chocolate blood sponge cake. Yeah, even though many cultures can be a bit finicky about this, scientists say it's a great way to get the culinary world to put an actual food to good use. People tend to joke about how someone in America actually managed to sue McDonald's for spilling hot coffee on themselves. But I think if you knew the actual story behind it, you might be a bit more sympathetic. Back in 1992, Mrs. Stella Liebeck actually suffered third-degree burns after spilling scorching hot coffee on herself while being in the passenger seat of her grandson's car, which had no cup holders. She went on to spill all the coffee on her lap while trying to put sweeteners in it while she was wearing cotton sweatpants. And if you know anything about cotton, it will absorb everything, meaning that it just burned her before she could really get her sweatpants off. And the temperature of the coffee was about 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 82 to 88 degrees Celsius. She would later be hospitalized for 8 days and had to have skin grafts and was in treatment for about 2 years though, in order to get herself back in normal condition. When she got out of the hospital, she asked McDonald's if they could pay her medical bills and her loss of income during the time she was in the hospital, which amounted to about $20,000. McDonald's flat out refused and only offered her about $800, to which she got a lawyer and sued. After multiple court hearings in a New Mexico district court, a jury of 12 deemed that 80% of the fault was McDonald's and 20% of the fault was on Liebeck through a process called comparative negligence. McDonald's was given 80% of the fault due to over 700 cases of reported injuries, and even with all of that, they still refused to lower the temperature. Liebeck would later be awarded $200,000 in compensation damages, but would only receive $160,000 due to her percentage of the fault. But because of McDonald's constant negligence, the court went on to further award Liebeck $2.7 million in punitive damages on top of what she already received. But she was by no means awarded all of that money. The judge went on to further lower the amount of punitive damages to $480,000. McDonald's would then go on to settle with Liebeck outside of court for $600,000, and that's how much Liebeck won. Though McDonald's still refuses to lower the temperature of their coffee that they serve, the solution they came up with was putting much larger warning labels on their coffee cups. So let me know your thoughts, whether you think it was fair or not, but I think it's a little less ridiculous than what it's been made out to be. When people think of fruit-bearing trees, they tend to just think of one fruit growing on a tree. You're not going to expect to see plums growing on a peach tree. But that said, you can now expect that. Sam Van Aken, who is an artist, found a way to put different fruit-bearing trees together through a process known as chip grafting to make a single tree that can produce a big variety of fruit. He calls them the 40 fruit tree because he can grow 40 different fruits on a single tree. Now this only works with the drupe family of fruits, such as plums, pears, cherries, peaches, almonds, apricots, fruits like that. I made a video about what is a berry, and that will describe fruits that you cannot do this with, except for the drupes that I also mentioned in the video, so check that out if that's up your alley. Sam has gone on to create quite a few 40 fruit trees, and they are quite beautiful, being that they all bloom at different times and they all react differently, but because they all are part of the same family, can work on a single tree. If you'd like to learn more about it, check out the link in the description. Now llamas are easily one of the most loved animals on earth. There's something about them that is just so darn majestic, I don't know how to describe it. Now llamas and camels were once the same animal about 3 to 5 million years ago on the North American plains. Ancestors of the two animals would go over to Asia and later Africa and South America. But even though they've been separated for over 3 million years, you can still breed them together and get a cama. A Kama. Yes, it's absolutely beautiful. Now, being that camels are about 6 times heavier than a llama, the only way to actually get offspring is through artificial insemination. And since 2008, there are actually 6 Kamas around today. Now, the goal with the Kama is to produce an animal that is large and strong and drought resistant, like a camel, but also an animal that can produce large quantities of wool, like a llama. So far, they are very gentle animals, which is good, and unlike a mule, they are fertile. So there is a possibility to have large populations of Kamas one day. And I think this is amazing. I mean, if I became world supreme leader, I would make sure everybody had their own personal Kama. So just remember that. It would be amazing. Lastly, wars can go on for a very long time. Interestingly enough though, there are a lot of websites with their own lists and none of them are the same, which surprises me. Some say the 100-Year War is the longest war ever. Some even say the 335-Year War is the longest one. I would think that would dictate over the 100-Year War. It just seems obvious to me. Though the longest war ever was fought between the Romans and the Persians, a war that would be passed on between the Persians and the Byzantines later on, once the Roman Empire split. The war was 721 years long. Even though the Byzantine Empire eventually won the whole war, both sides were completely exhausted, allowing the Islamic Empire to rise up and pretty much plow through both empires. Though if you consider a war only truly over once peace treaties are signed, the longest war ever was fought between Carthage and Rome, and didn't actually end through the signing of peace treaties all the way up until 1985. Out of probably what was just sheer humor, the mayor of Rome and the mayor of where Carthage once stood in the city of Tunisia, both signed a peace treaty in 1985. The only reason why a peace treaty was never signed was because Rome completely annihilated Carthage until 1985. So I guess it's up to you which one you think is the longest war. But either way, Rome, I'll tell you what, has crazy morale. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is 10 interesting facts that almost nobody knows. So my question for you guys is, which facts did you find the most interesting? I'd have to say my favorites were the African samurai and the Kama, which I think is, both those are pretty awesome. So with all that said, my name's Dale, this is Think Fact, and remember, never stop learning. If you guys like my videos, please subscribe to stay in tune. Stay in tune for videos over the facts and thoughts that almost everybody missed.